Hey everybody, we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Kristen.
I'm Dr. Erin.
And you are, as always, exceptionally welcome to our coverage today. We are two social scientists with PhDs who are obsessed with talking about culture, both popped and lived, and also believe that curiosity can change the world and that it has to. We also have to live more empathetic lives. Our entire existence as Abbey Research is as empathy educators. And so this channel is about helping you cultivate your empathetic responses and empathetic posture as you move through the world. We cover a wide variety of topics, everything from why we blame the Puritans for American levels of exhaustion to our feelings about the Oscar-winning movie Promising Young Woman, to why we believe that dollar store cap is so problematic in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We talk about stuff together all the time. We turn on the recording devices for y'all because we also love to talk to you. So please do not hesitate to hit that thumbs up on the YouTube algorithm, subscribe, comment, engage with us. We love to talk with y'all, especially on these 101 videos that I'll get to in a minute, where we want to continue to learn from you guys about the particular topic we're talking about.
This video is a part of our ongoing exploration of the history, legacy, impact of colonization around the world. We're having a fascinating and enjoyable time on our global stops, looking at the way that colonization has shaped the history and cultures of the places we're visiting. This month we are in Portuguese colonies, but you know, the Portuguese did have a colonial empire, but it wasn't as big as some of the others. And so we've run out of very large Portuguese colonies to talk about. So we've decided to flip the script a little in our last week for this month and look at Portugal and maybe talk about a little bit why they became a colonizer and what the history of that global expansion is and why they chose the places that they chose. So we're doing Portugal 101 today. What did I know about Portugal before we started? I definitely did not know that they were a colonizer before we started the Colonizers World Tour. And I didn't know a whole lot, except that it's a really cool place to live because they have a lot of liberal policies, seems to be friendly to outsiders. And my time as an international football fan, I did obviously know that Cristiano Ronaldo is Portuguese. It's hard to miss if you've watched a minute of international soccer. You know that Ronaldo is Portuguese. And we were reminiscing before we started filming one of our trips that we took on the European continent when we were living in Northern Ireland was 3 days in Barcelona, Spain. And we went to the Chocolate Museum, as you do. And they had, lest you think, lots of Lionel Messi statues all over the show. They also had a chocolate Cristiano Ronaldo.
I will giggle about the Cristiano Ronaldo statue made entirely in chocolate for a long time.
A long time.
So I knew they were colonizers because one of the things that Portugal did that was a little bit different than some other places, the Dutch did this too, was set up ports more often than take over entire stuff. And they fucked around in India for a little while, particularly in Goa. And part of my study of India and time in India was about colonization of southern India and the various East Indian trading companies. So I knew a little bit about Portugal then. And I remember as a Olympic devotee, the conversations about Portuguese during Rio, the 2016 Rio Olympics and the 2014 World Cup in Brazil. So I kind of absorbed some of that. I also happen to know that if you swim across the Atlantic Ocean from Philadelphia, you hit Porto. Because that was one of those things I was trying to explain to people when we lived in Northern Ireland, like why Ireland was so cold. And I was like, so look at the map of Europe, guys. Philly hits Portugal. So we're, things that I know. Did not know a lot of this, including my absolute favorite fact I've ever learned about any country, which we'll get to in a little bit. But first, before we get there, let's go to the map. So, as you may have realized by the way I said swim across the ocean, it is in Europe. It's on the Iberian Peninsula and is a rectangular shaped country on the left part of Spain, pretty much. There's around 10 million folks that live there. They're mostly Portuguese of varying definitions of that word, but there is a huge expat population there, which made their conversations about Brexit very interesting. The official language is Portuguese. I'll get back to that in a minute. Really quick, the capital is Lisbon. Porto is the other big city, and it's the one where if you see pictures of Portugal, Porto is going to show up a lot because it's like really multicolored and almost looks like in your brain when you do stereotype of the Mediterranean Ocean. Porto is actually what comes up a lot, even though it's on the Atlantic. Mm-hmm. So it's very multicolored. It's everything else. Back to the languages. We are not sociolinguistic scholars.
No.
Although I did do my PhD in the sociology of language. That is not sociolinguistics, believe it or not. Luckily for all of you and for us, one of our team members is a linguistic scholar. So we're going to let Eleanor explain the Portuguese language for a little bit before we come back and talk about the indigenous and ethnic conversation.
I just want to share with you a little bit about the Romance language family, which is the language family that Portuguese is a part of. As Dr. Kristen and Dr. Aaron have mentioned, Portuguese shares a lot of similarities with Spanish, and there are so many socio-political and obvious geographical reasons for all the contact the two countries have had over the years, and therefore the influence the languages have had on each other. But what this chart helps illustrate is the ways that these language groups have divided. So the Romances belong to the Indo-European language family, which is huge, but we're focusing on just the Italic branch, which leads to Latin, which leads us to the Romances. A quick glance at this tree gives you a bit of an explanation for why Romanian, which is a Latinate Romance language, seems so very different from Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, and French, also Latinate Romance languages, but also why Portuguese seems to share much more in common with Spanish than even French, let alone Italian. What this chart doesn't show you is the immense impact that contact, colonization, expansion, and trade have on language groups and similarities between languages. But as a way to look very simply at how languages relate more in a genetic sense than a sociological sense, this can be a good place to start.
Thank you for that, Eleanor.
Thank you.
Learning everything all the time, all the way. So it is a white homogeneous Mediterranean population, as I said before. There are definitely, a little bit more migration in the last bunch of years. We talked about with Brazil that after the election of Bolsonaro, quite a number of Brazilian citizens emigrated to Portugal. That is the same for Angola and for the mothership as they could, which is not the case for some other colonizers. So Portugal's relationship is really fascinating to us. Mm-hmm. In terms of a system of government, they are a semi-presidential republic. So it's a system in which a president exists alongside a prime minister and a cabinet, which is kind of what I think. There are 18 districts and 2 autonomous regions. One of them is like an art teacher just bought them and now hangs out, which is totally random. Thanks Geography Now for teaching us about that. The Azores Islands and Madeira wine, by the way, incredible. Madeira cake, also a big fan. So those are super great things. In terms of religion, I mean, guys, this is not going to surprise you. It is super duper Catholic.
Big time Catholic.
Big time Catholic. What's really interesting too is, and I'll say this because I don't think this fits anywhere else we're talking, but even though they are the colonizer and we're talking about them, this land was colonized frequently. Like that's crazy thing about human migration is that nowhere is pure. And I'm using air quotes for anyone who's not paying attention to the screen. Everywhere is a mix of a ton of other stuff. The Vikings showed up at one point because they showed up everywhere in Europe at one point or another. The Moors moved around, the Visigoths, it's never... We've just killed off indigenous populations everywhere, to be honest, because other indigenous populations have moved around and done things. And that was the nature, especially of pre-industrial, pre-printing press, pre-Reformation, everything Europe. So just because the state of Portugal was never colonized does not mean that the land of Portugal was not in some way, shape, or form. And one of the examples of that is how feckin' Catholic they are. Dr. Aaron, what would you like to address as we talk more about Portugal?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I thought was really interesting was the Proto-Celtic relationship between Portugal and like Hibernia, Ireland, and England and Scotland, as well as the relationship between the English and the Portuguese, who have one of the like longest, the oldest treaties, and like
1337.
I think so. Yeah. It's been a long time they've been friends, and it's because the Portuguese imported tea from China, and the Brits were like, "That's cool. We'll take more of that." And the Portuguese eat a lot of cod, but cod is not one of the myriad of fishes you can fish off the coast of Portugal. So they would get the cod from the North Atlantic, and the English, they trade cod and tea. I love it. Demographically, they have a young-ish population. Just over 40% are between 25 and 54. The median age is around 44, so a middle-aged population. Women received full legal equality as mandated by the Constitution in 1976, and we have a fantastic long-form article on feminism and the Carnation Revolution in our Google Doc. I haven't read all of it yet because it is long form, but it's really, really interesting, the relationship between women's rights and the role that they played in the revolution. Abortion laws were liberalized in 2007, but because of the whole Catholic thing, it can still be really difficult to obtain one legally, because they do have a law that says doctors can conscientiously object to performing abortions on moral grounds. With regards to queer life, again, pretty progressive in Europe when it comes to queer-friendly legislation. They legalized same-sex marriage in 2010. I think they were like the 6th country in Europe to do it. As we say always when we talk about queer life and marginalized groups in these places, just because something is legal doesn't mean there aren't stigmas and biases and discriminations still in place. But according to the letter of the law, Portugal's doing pretty good on a lot of those fronts. Speaking of Portugal, our friends at History Matters did like a why Portugal happened video, which is hilarious. But I think that's the question, like why Portugal became a colony. So let's hit the history of the process of becoming a colonizer. Normally we call it the history of colonization, but the history of the process. The Kingdom of Portugal dates way, way back to 1143. In December of 1640, their independence was reestablished after they spent a 60-year span in a voluntarily dynastic union with Spain. Like, the Iberian Peninsula, y'all, is hilarious. So, tangent here, one of the things that we learned is that even though they have a really close relationship with the Spanish and have for a long, long time, you do not want to be speaking Spanish and Portuguese in lieu of speaking Portuguese. They are not fans of it. And hilariously, very similar to what happened to us when we were in Barcelona, Dr. Kristen has a pretty good relationship with Spanish and thought, you know, Barcelona's in Spain. I could speak Spanish here. Misunderstood the level of significance of the Catalan language. And I think, don't you remember on the trams, it was like things were in 3 languages, Catalan, English, and then Spanish.
It was amazing.
Spanish was below. So if, you know, we have learned from our friends for this research for Portugal, don't speak Spanish, speak English, it's better. And we would tack onto that, if you go to Catalonia, if you go to Barcelona, speak English.
I always, whenever I'm talking about Barcelona, I say that my training in biblical Greek was more useful in Athens than my ability to speak Mexican Spanish was in Barcelona. So, like,
oh boy,
we laughed very hard at some of the looks that I got.
Oh my gosh,
we just gave up. I just gave up. I was like, I know how to. We went to a Starbucks. I was like, I know how to order coffee. No, yeah. I do not. I do not know how to order coffee in Catalonia.
Someday we'll talk more about maybe when we get to Spanish colonies again. We'll talk about Catalonia as an independent entity because it's fascinating. But I digress. They have a great relationship with Spain. They are one of the oldest nations in Europe. Portugal is, and one of the oldest borders in Europe. I've learned so much about Portugal. So why they became a colonizer. They were the first maritime power to come out of Europe, in large part because they owned most of the land where the Iberian Peninsula sits on the Atlantic Ocean. They see themselves very much as seafarers. Our friends at Geography Now really emphasize the importance of the sea and the water and being near it and being on it to Portuguese culture and identity. They invented the galleon ship and several forms of navigation. And so off they went in their galleon ships down the west coast of Africa, around the Cape of Good Hope, and stopped really where they could take food or gold or slaves. And we talked about this in the beginning a little bit. They weren't as culturally immersive colonizers as some of our other colonial colonizers we've been talking about, because a lot of times they stopped and took over ports or small areas. And even when we looked at Angola, the Portuguese didn't get very far in to Angolan territory with their colonization. It was a lot about strategic locations. Portuguese traders who eventually became colonizers brought lots of imports to Europe, like tea and textiles and ceramics. So that made them friends with a lot of folks and thus perpetuated the colonization. Their wealth came, the Portuguese Empire's wealth came from controlling shipping and trading routes around Africa, which, we just spent 2 weeks in Angola and Mozambique. That makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. Portuguese didn't start out to be colonizers, but they were a trading empire and eventually built colonies for the sustenance of and the maintenance of that trading empire. Whereas our Spanish colonizers were like, no, we're taking Christianity and we're going. And there was a lot bigger link between Isabella and Ferdinand's deeply, deeply held religious beliefs as the monarchs of Spain and Spanish colonization. But its heyday as a maritime power did not last for long. They lost a lot of their wealth and status with the almost total destruction of Lisbon in a 1755 earthquake. They were occupied during the Napoleonic Wars, and the independence of Brazil in 1822 put a dent in some of their power. In 1910, they had a revolution that deposed the monarchy and proclaimed a republic. They had a brief period till the 1930s, and then the installation of a new president and the Second Republic that was fascist. So for the next couple decades, they had some repressive governments, wasn't great for women, wasn't great for a lot of people, and all tied together with the wave of growing anti-colonial movements across parts of colonized Africa. In 1974, we had a left-wing coup that installed broad democratic reforms. And it's fascinating and complicated. The coup and its planning, the Carnation Revolution actually started in Portuguese colonies in Africa, in Mozambique and Angola. Fascinating. The following year after this coup, they granted independence to all of their African colonies. As we talked about with Angola and Mozambique, they pieced out really quickly, destabilizing significantly Angola and Mozambique and leading to very protracted, violent civil wars. So not great. But it was the Carnation Revolution was one of the driving forces that ended colonization and overthrew this fascist regime. Tomorrow we'll be talking about a movie, Captains of April, that is about the Carnation Revolution. We're super excited to learn more about it. Oh boy, it's just going to be some good times. So from there, we have the evolution of the more progressive, not fascist Portuguese state that we have. They're members and belong to the EU and the Economic Committee or Community, whatever it was before the EU. They've been around the show for a long time. Interesting relationship with Britain and Brexit, in some financial trouble in the global recession as well, along with Ireland that they are recovering from. But Dr. Kristen, I'm going to throw in what I want to talk about really quickly, because I know what you want to talk about is very exciting, and I think it's what we should end on. So really quickly, what I want to talk about is in Lisbon, there's this really, really cool library called the Livraria Lelo. It's a super famous bookstore. Look it up. It looks amazing. We are totes going when we go to Portugal, which we are definitely doing. And it supposedly inspired J.K. Rowling when she was writing Harry Potter, which is awesome. I also learned about a big wave surfer, Portuguese big wave surfer, Joana Andrade, and the documentary Big versus Small, which sounds really, really cool and came out earlier in 2021. So if we can find it and we can watch it, we probably will at some point, and we might cover it. But the big wave competitive circuit is really based in Portugal, because if you've seen those videos of like the crazy massive waves, happens off the coast of Portugal, which I did not know and am fascinated by. So Dr. Kristen, I'm so excited about this. What did you learn that you want to talk about Portugal? Guys.
The Carnation Revolution, the signal to begin the coup in April of 1975, was done on a Eurovision song. That's it. I'm going to say that now. We're going to talk about it tomorrow. A Eurovision song kicked off a revolution. Eurovision changed the world. No, I'm sorry. It was in the 1974 Eurovision, and then 1975 is when it all happened. 1974 Eurovision also introduced the world to ABBA. So 1974 was very important. Kicked off a revolution.
For our friends out there that are watching that don't know what Eurovision is, I don't even know how to succinctly explain it. It is a cultural phenomenon.
It's America's Got Talent, but it's all musical acts from individual countries.
From European countries. And it's a very long process to become the Eurovision act for your country, and then to perform. And there's a night of performances, a Eurovision contest, final contest. And then
this year Italy won, by the way.
This year Italy won, I know. So they've won the Eurovision and the Euros, which is exciting. It's hosted by the country that won the previous year hosts the following year. And all the other countries vote. So it's very political, because no one ever votes for England.
It's hilarious.
It's hilarious. And so the country that gets the most points votes wins. But yeah, I mean, what's his face? Oh no, his name's totally, the comedian that
Graham Norton?
That did the Eurovision film.
Oh, Will Ferrell.
Will Ferrell, yeah. Will Ferrell did a Eurovision film in the last couple years with Rachel McAdam. If you saw that, that was about Eurovision. I haven't seen it yet. But yeah, Eurovision. Yeah,
his wife is European. So he wanted to make a movie about this thing that her family is super into. I think she's Swedish, that he didn't understand. And so he made it. People like Eurovision devotees like the film. Yeah. So it's a little bit like NASCAR fans like Talladega Nights. It's that kind of vibe. So
some of our best memories living in Belfast were sitting around drinking and watching Eurovision. If you know Riverdance, the Irish dancing phenomenon started on Eurovision. Lots of things started on Eurovision we don't know about.
Celine Dion?
Yeah, Celine Dion got her start on Eurovision. I know, it's crazy. But oh boy, just look up some clips from Eurovision, and especially Dustin the Turkey from Ireland, because that was a year.
That was a year.
That was a time.
We'll talk about it more tomorrow, obviously. And we might even do some Eurovision coverage next year, because it'll be the after times and we could watch it together again.
Ooh, that would be fun.
That would be super fun. So that's it for Portugal 101. We hope you learned a lot, and we hope you join us tomorrow to learn even more.
See you then, everybody.